soon.
Very soon, I hope.
Well, it's coming back
yeah,
in
it's
the...
in August now.
Yeah.
Hopefully I should be able to go.
Yeah.
It's a good thing that we're not going to be doing FlameCon this year. Otherwise, those would have definitely conflicted.
Ah.
All right, so we're live now. So...
Hello.
Hello. Welcome, everybody, to the 5th stream of Hiveworks' weekend of streams at #BEEHOME. So this one is the Saturday, March 14th, 3 p.m. East stream, The Challenges of Writing a Coming-of-Age Story. So just a reminder to everybody that's sort of like logging into Twitch, if you scroll down to the viewing screen, there's a couple of links that you can go visit. We currently have 2 Kickstarters running, so you can check them out. We've got one for Alice in the Nightmare Book 1. We've got one for Among Us Book 1. Sorry. Both are excellent books. Definitely check those out. And we also have a store sale going on. If you use the code SPRING2020, you get 10% off. And reminder that while we're doing all these streams, Iron Circus is also doing streams under the hashtag PajamaCon, so definitely check out their Twitter and the hashtag for more content. This is happening all weekend for them and for us, and it's really, really cool. So for this stream, the guests that we have are Mari Hagel, who is the author of Let's Speak English and Sleepless Domain, and Kiwi, I want to say Blast. Okay, I want to say Blast.
My name's Mary Kegel. Hi.
Mary Kegel. We've got Magnolio Portisadel, who is the author of Monster Pulse, and we have a surprise guest, Tom Siddle, who is the author of Gonna Crit Court. Hooray!
I happen to be in the area, so I thought I'd stop by.
Yeah, just dropping in. So that's pretty fun. All 3 are comics that I personally read on like an update. Cutie Blast, yeah. Who's hosting? It is again me, Isabelle Melançon, your ever-present host and the author of Namesake and the lead editor at Hiveworks. So hello, it's me. I always forget to introduce myself. So yeah, essentially, these are all comics that I read on a daily basis and enjoy all of them. And they all have, they're all really good.
Thank you.
Try to be cool about it. They all have this common thread that... Oh, there's someone in the comment. Is it silent for everyone or just me? No, there is sound. I'm seeing it detected, so... It might be your options.
Yeah, someone might accidentally have it muted.
Yeah. So essentially all the comics have this common thread that they're pretty much all built around a young girl that is growing throughout the story. So all of them are very elaborate, sprawling coming of age stories. They're all built around sort of a theme. Like Sleepless Domain is around the idea of magical girls, which are a common Japanese motif that is used in anime a lot. Gonna Crit Court is around school mystery, which was like actually a common motif in a lot of like British adventure books. So it's like really interesting to see like this newer riff on it. And Monster Pulse is kind of like, it reminds me a lot of like 90s not YA. It's Digimon, yeah. It reminds me a lot of like 90s stuff. Like it's not YA because YA didn't really exist back then, but like Animorphs and Digimon and that kind of stuff. So really this idea of like the questing youth, you know?
Or put upon youth, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Monster friends.
Yeah.
Monster friends and the trauma that comes with them.
Heck yeah.
Those guys, that's fun. So you guys all write this kind of story, and for some of you, I think that this comic is actually, the comic that you're currently writing right now is actually your first. I know for Mari, it's actually like your 4th or something. You just...
Wait, real quick, just so people don't get confused. My name's Mary. Yeah, it's like my third or something, my third long running comic. And I know Magnolia had Bob White and other things before.
Oh,
Yeah, I
that's
did a couple of
right.
comics before this one, but I think this one is the one I've definitely spent the longest on because
I think
Bob White had.
I'm. Oh, sorry. I think I'm the odd
Go
one
ahead.
out here. This is definitely my first actual comic.
You just came out the gate swinging.
Yeah,
That's
came out the gate shaming us with how good your story is.
How dare.
So, why did you guys kind of choose to go for like, because all free stories have a really strong thematic motif, but all free stories are also like very obviously coming of age story because in like two of them, Monster Pulse and Gunnercrit Court, you can actually see the hero age like visibly. In Sleepless Domain, not so much because it's on a shorter time period, but you can see the character age emotionally really fast. So this sort of the question that I'd like everybody to sort of answer is like, why the thematic motif and why the coming of age story like as a choice directly for like these comics? Like, why did that kind of thing really call to you?
So we have to choose who talks first. Magnolia,
Yeah.
go.
Magnolia,
Okay,
you can
well, for
start.
me, I was really influenced, well, by the stories I kind of was reading growing up, like Digimon and Pokemon and things like that. And I knew I wanted to do a story like that, which is about, kids and their monster friends, but kind of also what the reason why Digimon was always more interesting to me was because the monsters represented something beyond just like a fun monster friend, I guess. So for Digimon, they kind of represented, to me anyway, maybe I was reading too much into it, an aspect of the kid's personality or an area where they needed to grow or change. And then their fighting and evolutions was just kind of like an extension of their maturity and emotional growth. And I really wanted to do a story like that. And um, I think for me, telling a story about young kids who are turning into teens was just kind of a natural choice for that because there's so many big emotions and not big things that happen when you're a teen, but things that feel really big. And I was just really interested also in the concept of like what it means to be growing up, and then that means that you have all these things that you want to do that you don't know how to do yet, basically because you're not actually an adult. And it just seemed like a natural choice for that metaphor. And I really wanted to draw cool monsters and stuff, so um,
There's also like the component in these stories a lot that like the discussion of is the monster or the weapon or whatever is the sort of quest or extension of the body object, like is it a tool or is it a part of you, is like a very recurrent theme in these kinds of stories. And I think that really meshes well with the idea of like growing.
yeah. And if their monsters in my comic are come from parts of their body, then it's kind of a very on the nose metaphor if you think about it, because these are kids who are constantly coming to terms with their bodies very literally. And I almost realized that later. I was like, oh, I'm writing about a young girl struggling to accept her body. I was like, that's pretty obvious. Oh well,
And you know, with recent developments, which we're not going to mention directly because spoilers, but like
Mhm.
with recent developments, the whole like on the nose aspect of the girl accepting her body has become extremely on the nose.
That's right. Well,
Aw, yeah.
that's me. I love it.
I still gotta draw fan art of that wink.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
I don't
yeah,
mind.
same.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I was excited about it.
So
Yeah.
what about you, Tom? Why the theme? Why the coming of age story?
Um, well, let's see. I guess when I started the comic, I kind of had in mind the environment. I mean, it all started with just Annie's design first, but then I knew I put her in this environment that had these like aspects that I was interested in, like namely science fiction and fantasy and stuff, and I wanted to incorporate them. But instead of making it purely situationally driven, the story, I felt that the main character as well should be kind of a mystery. So, which is why she's kind of very, very stoic and strange at the beginning, and she continues to evolve as the story goes along. And I felt that, like, I guess as the story like evolved, I felt that it was pretty natural just to show her and her friends and the environment around them kind of evolving and growing as well, and kind of the sort of challenges that they'd face along that way. For me, it felt pretty natural to have the characters age as the story went along. I guess those are the kind of comics I've always liked, in the past. So I definitely wanted to do that in mind too. So I guess it was just the sort of subject matter that really appealed to me when I was just figuring out what I wanted to focus on.
I like that you mentioned the environment, because in a comic like Gunnerkid Court, you actually have two protagonists that are growing with the story, but they're also growing amidst what is essentially a dual environment. There's two really big different forces that are connected in a story quite literally by a bridge, and it's sort of this idea of how this influence each character's super differently. What's happening to Antimony is very different than what's happening to Kat, but it's also complementary, and it's also sort of a reflection of the court and the forest. Right now in the story, the forest is very much chaotic because of Lou, but also the court is very chaotic because it's reacting to the attack from the forest, and we're kind of seeing that affecting the growth of the characters too. So the dual characters and the dual environment was always kind of something that you really wanted to play with. It's fantasy versus sci-fi in a lot of ways.
Sure, yeah, definitely. And that's kind of depicted almost very literally in the two characters. Even though Annie lives in the court, she's still very much more sort of empathetic to the forest. So I always imagine Annie is more closer to the forest and Kat is closer to the court, and the two of them are very opposite in the same way that the court and the forest are. But while those opposites kind of drive the court and the forest away, I wanted to write it such that the opposites between Annie and Kat are kind of complementary to each other, rather than whatever the opposite is. They don't drive each other away. They kind their different skills and their different sensibilities, they end up really helping each other and showing that two different things can really work together even if they're very different. And so that's what I wanted to show in the two main characters, kind of at odds to what's going on in the background and the environment that they're living in.
If we're moving on to Mari, so the difference between Sleepless Domain as a coming-of-age story, I feel, compared to Tom and Magnolia's story, that start pushed by very much the idea of a new environment and right away being put in a situation of learning. The situation that you put your character that pushes her growth extremely forward is actually grief. So why did you decide to pick such a dark force to sort of motivate a character to become stronger and grow into adulthood?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of it is around that time there was a lot of stories where, especially things like Madoka, which obviously is another dark magical girl story that I do enjoy, but it characters very rarely, I felt got to deal with grief, even in stories where a lot of their friends end up dying, because usually a lot of the times it ends up being I need to get revenge, or I need to undo it thanks to time shenanigans or something. And I always felt that was a slightly missed opportunity to actually really see people dealing realistically with the loss of their friends and stuff, and so that's part of it.
I'd actually argue that a lot of magical stories actually deal with grief, and honestly, when I started reading Sleepless Domain, that was kind of what I thought. If we look at what is the magical girl story that most people know, which is Sailor Moon is also urgently dipped in grief, because the original story is about Sailor Moon learning that she's a reincarnation of someone who died tragically. So I feel and even in stuff like you were mentioning Puella Magi, and even more run-of-the-mill magical girl stuff Precure, there's a lot of this idea of change and grief that comes back a lot. Is that something that you picked up a lot when you fell in love with this kind of motif, or did it just sort of happen on accident?
So a lot of it happened kind of naturally. I would say in Sailor Moon, I never really felt that was a huge theme of it, because a lot of it was, her finding out about stuff that happened before her lifetime. So it always felt more like a like a Shakespearean tragedy kind of element than like really like a realistic dealing with those kinds of feelings. But it's also like Sleepless Domain originally, when I was pitching the idea, was this very different thing that was like a magical girl elimination show, and so like every iteration of it that changed after that kind of naturally followed into what it ended up being.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was like my very first idea for it was like the water girl from a team like entered a reality show about magical girls, and so like everyone thinks that she won't win because she's the water one, and who cares? But and then a lot of things obviously changed since then.
When you guys are writing these characters... Oh, I'm sorry. Am I super loud? I can actually bring it down. I actually brought myself up because I tend to be very quiet.
I'm not too far.
How's that? Is this better?
I didn't notice a difference, but it sounds fine to me.
Yeah, I have everyone's levels adjusted on my end, so we probably can't tell what it sounds like to other people.
I can just up everybody else a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still listening to the Discord, so like I'm looking at the chat on Twitch, but I have the audio muted, so I can't really say.
Yeah, I don't have
to
the
me, that's
chat
fine.
open. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I guess
You
tell
don't
me
have
if
to
there's
look.
anything. Cool.
I take care of looking at it. Don't worry about it. All right.
Sure.
I brought everybody a bit up, so hopefully that'll help. Yay.
Tell me if they bully me in there.
No, they're bullying me.
I want to see what they're saying in here.
So I have this. Now I'm really quiet. All right, there we go. There we go.
Ain't that always the way?
I overcorrected. Okay, so an interesting question I find when we're writing these stories, especially for the characters that you guys have, because the sort of the paths that your characters take, and I'm thinking a lot about Antimony, who tends to like take 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back in terms of like emotional growth, but like, you know how your characters sometimes grow and they're not necessarily turning into the best people, and they sort of have to catch themselves before they sort of become like a little bit, you know, nastier than they should be. Like, how do you feel about writing a character becoming their best selves, but sort of sometimes turning into their worst selves?
Tom, do you want to take that one first?
I guess I'll start. Yeah, like I think that's a pretty good description of Annie's kind of emotional growth. You know, where every time, like a large part of the beginning of the story is kind of dealt with her coming out of her shell a bit and showing that she's not really empathizing or emoting very well and stuff. But this unfortunately, it also shows as it goes on that when she does start to come out, she can be kind of a brat sometimes, you know, a bit of a jerk, and she can get a bit full of herself. And it's at those points when sometimes she realizes that she could be in a dangerous situation, or sometimes she realizes that she's hurting somebody that she didn't mean to. And I think that I wanted to write her that way because I think that's kind of a thing to do where if you just receive nothing but positive reinforcement, you can start to think that you can do no wrong, you know, and that all the choices that you're making are the right ones, and that so necessarily then whatever you might do in the future might be the right one. But Annie kind of has to learn that that's not the case, and she's not. While she is the protagonist in the comic, she's not the only person that lives in that environment, and sometimes her actions really do lead to putting her or other people in danger, and sometimes people have to call her out on that. And I kind of relish those moments when, like, I mean, I enjoy like getting to write Annie as a bit of a brat sometimes, but then I do also have to get one of the other characters to come by and make sure that she is sort of reined in a little bit.
Do you also, is it okay if I jump in here real quick?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Do you also kind of find that I always see characters who are very introverted and shy, as like when they start to come out of their shell, it's almost like, this is both in real life and in fiction, but I think in real life too, when they start to come out of their shell, it's like they don't know how to regulate. So they think, I'm coming out of my shell, I'm going to finally speak my mind. And then they do that a little bit too much, and you have to kind of re-regulate how you you have to basically learn from scratch what the appropriate level is. You know
Yeah,
what I
how
mean?
to temper that, because
Yeah. So
sometimes you
I think that's
start coming
definitely part
out.
of the human experience, isn't it?
yeah. And I see that a lot in Annie, I think.
I think a lot of the time, specifically away from real life, narratively, I've always felt that when you do get a very quiet character who then has to sort of come out of their shell, it's usually done to then reveal what a beautiful person they are deep down, and the world is missing out on their their inner character, and so they have to be brought out, and so everyone can see how amazing they are, which is fine, but that doesn't really always happen, So for Annie, kind of, I didn't want it to just be that, where she was a quiet girl, and the more open she is with people, then just the more people will like her. The better she's able to kind of interact in her situation. I thought that would have been a bit one note, so I wanted to keep away from that.
I really like how you play into that with the fantasy metaphors, like how she has the fire version of her when she cuts her hair, and obviously that's dealing with her inner self, but it's also literal in the comic, and I think stuff like that works really well.
And lately, and it's not really spoilers or anything, but like right now in the story, there are literally two versions of Annie, and that's been going on for a few chapters now. And one of the reasons why I did that is because I wanted to kind of show that internal monologue between the two of them, just very literally in the story. Like one chapter is entirely the two of them talking to each other, or so it's just a chapter of Annie talking to herself, really, and kind of working over these inner thoughts that she might have, but in an external way that we can then like actually view, instead of rather than me having to put a lot of thought bubbles in there.
I'm
But
definitely a
are there
fan.
only two, Tom? Are there only two?
For the time being, we'll see.
How many Annies do you have?
But it'll be as many
Show
as
me
I
all
can
these
imagine.
Annies.
For being my main character, I on the topic of a character being, I guess, somewhat unlikable or making bad choices, I find that some people seem to really like Bina, some people seem to really hate her because she can be sort of selfish, but in a way that's not. She's not like a very. To me, she's not like a very arrogant or showy character, but she does behave selfishly in more quiet ways. So I feel like people are kind of like, "Hey, wait a minute," about her. But I sort of wanted to
Like,
show.
you're not sure if she'll say something and then walk away, and then you're like, hey, wait.
Yeah.
I'll
I
fight
wanted.
those people.
were you being
I know.
smart?
I know. Thank you, but I kind of feel like it's a kind of similar thing where I don't want her to just be the person who's good and right and nice all the time, but I also wanted to show that a character can be not nice, but also that doesn't mean that they're a bad person who has bad intentions. Because, well, I don't want to say, well, she does have good intentions that she's a good person, because that's up to you to decide as a reader. But she's certainly not out to harm anyone. She's just kind of figuring out her own emotions, and sometimes you just can't be nice no matter how much you're trying, especially when you're dealing with something very difficult. So
Some of my favorite moments with her are when she has like internal thoughts that are very pragmatic, and it's like, oh no, like I shouldn't have those thoughts that are like in this situation, but like I think everyone does, and obviously like you feel bad about it, but you can't help, like your brain's always doing a lot of different consideration of what you need to do, and I like it.
thank you. I
And
like
it's
your
real.
comic too.
Hey, I like a comic.
Hey, good comic. Good comics, guys.
Comic, everybody. Sorry.
I think an interesting sort of segue, since we're talking about what a character thinks and then how they act and how that's sort of different, is sort of showing the character's growth towards like from child to adult. It's shown a lot in the relationships that they have with a lot of people, and I think in all these comics, like it's very much that. Like in Monster Pulse, it's yeah, there's someone in chat going, are you folks just flirting with each other's comics? Yeah, obviously. This is what these streams are for.
Hey.
I married one of these comics, so
Yeah. Magnolia has, just beating all of us to the punch.
yeah.
But yeah, you guys have
Hey,
like,
this boy came with it, huh?
oh no. So it's sort of this idea like Magnolia, you have an ensemble cast, so your lead interacting with everybody is sort of what determines, how she grows. And like she's got a romantic relationship, she's got friends, she's got someone she doesn't like because of jealousy a little bit. Like it's very different dynamics. And like we said earlier in Get a Crit Court, it's Antimony and Kat who are essentially sort of the soul of the story. So their relationship and the differences in their characters is what drives both of them forward. And in the case of Sleepless Domain, obviously Undyne has Kokoro or HP as like their main sort of like anchor into this, to a point where currently in the story you have other characters that are upset because they assume that Undyne being sort of around HP is going to sort of lead to HP's demise, which is a really interesting plot point that I like, and sort of really ties into like this idea that like your growth is determined by your relationships and how you react to people, like Tom was saying earlier, calling you out on your shit or encouraging you to become a better person. So, how did you come up with supporting characters? And I think it would be really interesting to talk about those characters too, because although you all have that supporting character motifs, you have extremely different people. Like HP is like the tough sort of mentor figure almost, even though she's still a teenager, so she still has scenes like in private where she's very much a teenager. Tom, you've got Kat, who is an equal in age and like knowledge, but also has a lot of differences and separations from Annie. And in your case, Magnolia, because you've got a romantic relationship that's sort of tangled as one of the closest relationships, like why choose that character as the main anchor,
Mary, do you want to start this time?
Sure. Yeah, for me, like a lot of it is obviously Undine is going through a lot of emotional issues, and I wanted HP to be someone who's kind of been there and can help pull her out, because a lot of times like I feel that way when I see people that are young and dealing with a lot of depression and stuff, because it's like, yeah, I remember that, but it's okay. And that's why like HP is on antidepressants and stuff, because I wanted her to be someone who has like mostly figured things out for herself, but obviously like she's found something that works for her, but in some ways maybe she's like cut off other people and other things that might hurt her, and she has to learn to open herself up emotionally in some ways more to still kind of finding that proper balance that obviously you're still dealing with most of your life. So I think I just thought that made a lot of sense with it, Undine.
I think that's a sweet approach that HP is so that she's still a kid, but she kind of has her stuff together, and she's like, it's almost like she's eager to talk about it, kind of like, here, this is the stuff that I try, you should do it too, and I think it's very sweet and earnest.
Well, thank you.
And I just like the approach of it's a dark story, so let's deal with it by drinking a lot of water and getting exercise and going to a therapist and stuff. I think that's a nice way to approach it. But it still has, drama and conflict. I also just want to say regarding Sleepless Domain that I still really like Cassidy, and I don't think she's right, but I'm rooting for her, kind of. Not versus Undine, but like to be okay.
I mean, I'm kind of the same. Also, she has like the coolest designs. So I kind of want her to not be a dick, or like to be a dick, but like in a good way.
I want her to be a dick but be okay, and people forgive her eventually. That's my hope.
I'm not telling. You guys talk about your characters.
Yeah, let's sort of. Magnolia, you tell us a little bit about, why you picked the personalities you picked to sort of flesh out the crew around Bina.
Well, Bina is to me, she's like very serious. And I wanted to, my thought for Bina was that she would kind of be like the character who's like the sweet big sister healer type, except it would turn out that she's actually, kind of more tough and ruthless than that underneath. And then I guess Abel, he's still her boyfriend at this point. because they kind of had it almost broke up there for a second. Abel is the four main characters are Bina, Abel, Julie, and Wes, and they all have different arcs, and they're all friends with each other. And I tried to write them all having kind of different relationships with each other that affect them. But Abel she was in love with him basically, not since she met him, but almost from the start of the comic, and I wanted to develop that into a relationship. I think it was mainly because I remember that was something, like the idea of having a boyfriend basically was something I was really obsessed with when I was a teen, but I didn't ever do until I was an adult. So maybe it's a little bit wish fulfillment on my part.
You were like saving up to marry that comic.
Yeah, but also like I think also I remember really strongly feelings like, oh, if I like this person, what do I do? I can't like ask them out to dinner. I'm 13, you know what I mean? Like I just had no idea what to do in that regard. And I think at the beginning I was sort of exploring that, but it also is a little bit of a wish fulfillment comic in that in this part of the story, the kids are basically as independent as adults because of the situation of the story. Like they're not really beholden to school or parents at this point, just because they're in kind of an emergency situation in which they have an uncommon sort of authority, so that it's kind of an unrealistic situation in which they are sort of trusted to handle themselves, when normally as someone their age, even though they're like 16, 17, sometimes maybe 18 at this point in the story, that's still kind of young to sort of be on their own. But I think that's also kind of part of the wish fulfillment of coming of age stories in some ways, like especially kids' adventure stories, like the idea of like, oh, we're on our own now, even though I try to think about what their parents and families feel. I feel like I got a little bit off topic, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I was really interested in exploring that relationship, but also how it could potentially develop when they're kind of stuck in this very intense situation that makes the feelings grow very quickly because they are kind of forced to be close in some ways.
Yeah, especially with the recent developments, because a lot of stuff happened to Bina, and Abel like sort of came back as like, I'm gonna be your boyfriend now. And although like a part of me is like, yay, another part of me is like, ooh, that can't be healthy, you know.
Well, I did want it to seem I don't like to tell people like how to feel about the story, but I did want it to seem a little bit like he was making a hasty decision. So we'll see how that turns out, I guess.
Oh no, you do your best with kids.
Yeah.
How about you, Tom? Like, you've got like Kat as a character. Kat is like the main catalyst for Annie's growth. The other main catalyst being like her dad. So, why Kat? Like, how did you invest so much in her? Like, why did you choose to give her this kind of personality?
Let's see. I guess the most obvious thing is still sticking with the motif of the two of them. They're like being very, very opposite with each other, and one of the ways that they differ personality-wise is, like at the beginning of the story, Kat seemed, I wanted her to be more of the kind of, I guess, in want of a better term, like the more streetwise kind of, she seemed more socially adapted and more able to be in touch with her feelings than Annie did, and like that was one of the ways that she helped draw Annie out. But as it goes on and we see more of the two of them, I wanted it to be clear that there are things that Annie can do differently to Kat. So Annie, as awkward as she is, a lot of that sort of awkwardness and her issues don't really come from don't really take an inward perspective. It's not really her abilities or her inward thoughts that she has a trouble with. It's like external. Whereas with Kat, she's always been very externally adept at dealing with situations and stuff. But I've made it kind of clear that she's kind of very self-conscious, and she's actually worse at dealing with her own kind of misgivings than even Annie is sometimes. And I felt that was just another way of having two personalities that were very different to each other and like explain and exploring them. So I didn't want to just give all of the sort of emotional kind of situational like development just to Annie, and Kat's just this perfectly formed like girl that she just makes friends with. She has her own stuff to deal with and in a kind of a different way to Annie. And then this comes into causing situations where, because Annie can sometimes be a bit too sure of herself, which again leads her to being a bit of a brat. It also leads her to not notice, say, when it could be Kat who has some internal issues, because whereas Annie, when she now that she's come out of her shell more and she's able to kind of externalize when she's feeling upset about something, it's almost been like Kat does almost the opposite. Again, not to belabor a point, but when Kat's feeling down about something, she will keep it very internalized, and it's only now that kind of Annie and the reader is really starting to really learn that, and that's sort of what I'm exploring in the current set of chapters. I just felt it made kind of an interesting combination.
Yeah, it's pretty great. We got a couple of questions that came in from the chats and the Twitter thing, so I got two I really want to push, so I'm gonna push the first one. So someone asked, since you're writing stories, even though your audience isn't necessarily teens, but you're writing stories with teens becoming adults. So if you have teen readers, because obviously you do, because teens don't respect, age appropriate literature, what would you like your teens readers to like take from the story for their own personal growth?
It's a tough one. I'll let you guys handle it first.
You go, Mary.
Oh no!
Oh, gotcha.
Okay, I'll go.
I both go.
I think maybe sometimes Sleepless Domain gets a little too on the nose with like like things that I want to tell to kids. Like it's okay to be on antidepressants. Don't forget to get a good night's sleep is the first step to kicking ass. So obviously there's a lot of stuff like that in there. That's things that I think are healthy coping mechanisms or whatnot. And obviously just that in general, obviously Undine is learning the importance of like opening up to other people and how much that can help with your own issues when you share that burden with others, and that it's okay to share that burden with people who are willing to do it with you. And so yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that I think is important. You go, Magnolia.
All right. I guess for me,
wait.
Oh, go ahead.
All right, now.
You monster. I guess for me, I hope that if teens read my comic, they wouldn't necessarily think that I'm trying to say that everything that my characters do are things that they should do. I guess I'm more interested in exploring what I remember as like strong feelings or impulses from that time. But I think, again, not to over-explain themes, but one of the themes that I wanted to explore is the idea of that sometimes there's things that you can't fix, and that's sort of okay, and it's okay that sometimes things aren't what you wanted them to be. And I think that's something that I know I did, and I think a lot of people like kind of beat themselves up over. And which isn't to say that you should just give up and not try to change anything, because obviously that's not the case. But there are some things that it's kind of okay to just be like, it's like this, and it's probably not going to change, and that's all right. I can move on. I'm not going into specifics because it's really more of a kind of a vague thing, but it's something that sort of helped me move past my own hangups when I was younger. So I think that's kind of the vague feeling that I want to get across, that like sometimes things suck, and even if there's not really a happy change for that, you can still have a happy life, kind of.
So you're just basically making a hang in there kitty poster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I should have just done that. But there you go.
Nobody's nerfed.
That's my motto. How about you, Tom?
Sorry. But I guess before actually just going back to the question, they were asking like if there were sort of messages that you were trying to impart, and I wonder if you guys were like actively trying to do that, or like do you think about a particular type of message you're trying to give across, or kind of, I guess, make your characters act in a way that was almost an example to teen readers, that kind of thing?
I don't. I more think about the theme that I'm trying to get across, which may not necessarily be an example, but is a message in some ways, and whether it's a instructive message or not, I guess it depends on the person. But it seems like, Mary, you do kind of speak more directly with your comic.
Yeah, sometimes. Like, and yeah, I'd say it's a mix of wanting to do that a little bit, but also just like letting the characters like I want I guess I want people to feel seen in some ways, like just if it's the characters expressing like a shitty mood or like a thought that they have that they think isn't okay. I think there's like a lot of usefulness to that, just like being out there and being like, look, this is a thing that people think. You're not crazy.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty interesting. I think it's pretty similar to how I felt about being careful about making it seem like I'm trying to make a point. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't say that I wasn't showing things in the story because I wanted to give an example of what somebody should do in a situation or try and give the readers a message. But I guess what I do try and do is show the characters. They talk a lot about seeing things from different perspectives, and I show that like advice for one person may not necessarily be good depending on who it's coming from or the type of person that you are. And I try and show that, say, with the different types of relationships that the characters have. Like Annie has a very close relationship to Isengrin, despite him being like probably the worst person to give relationship or friendship advice. But for Annie, it really helped her a lot.
Really.
Well, exactly, yeah, and sometimes people call Annie out on that when she says like, well, my friend Isengrin told me to do this, and they're like, well, yeah, but your friend Isengrin is a crazy wolf man that lives in the forest, But for Annie, she's able to find strength in some of his words, but I do try and show that you should look at any advice given or any situation really from different perspectives, and so while I'm not trying to like give any messages or anything, I'm at least, I don't know, maybe the one message I'm trying to show is like critical thinking of motivations or your situation or advice, that kind of thing. But as far as like specific examples of like that I'd be trying to give to readers, I'm not sure. I think I've tried to kind of avoid that and not make it seem like I'm trying to tell anybody how to act.
Yeah, it's definitely you definitely have to find a balance to where you don't feel like you're being preachy. I think in some ways, like hopefully if you write realistic characters and like it feel like the two paths they take are either they self-destruct or they learn things that end up being kind of applicable to real people because they're like real people.
And I think it's fun to show consequences too, not just be like, oh, here's how you should act and then everything will be fine. I think you can almost kind of teach that by showing what would happen if you act without thinking. You show the consequences of something bad happening, and I think that's just as helpful.
Yeah.
I've got another question. I had two that I saved. Yeah, if you guys in the stream have more questions, feel free to put them in. I'm like writing them down. I'm not necessarily putting them directly as you say them, but I'm writing stuff down. So this other person was asking, I'm embellishing a little bit, because all the characters that you guys have picked, as on opposites of stories that are more like less fantasy, where the character is just like character based, all your characters are tied to a lot of symbolism. Like Undine is literally water, Antimony is literally fire, and Bina is literally a heart. So
oh my god, we got most of the Captain Planet kids.
Oh my god.
We can do this.
So it's sort of this idea that like, because the character has such obvious symbolism, how does the symbolism sort of play into them growing and changing? And like, I think with characters, like it hasn't really happened to Undine yet, possibly because the story is still really early, but sort of like we saw that a lot with Bina and Antimony, where they lost sort of like grip on the symbol, the power that they had. So it's sort of this idea that like, kind of like in the Ghibli movie, like Kiki's Delivery Service, at some point the power goes away and she has to reconnect with it. So sort of using this incredibly, I'm not going to say obvious, but, incredibly present symbolism and how it communicates with the characters as they grow and what it means to sort of like re-temper, like communicate with this aspect of their power, like why I choose this kind of symbol. How does the symbol influence the story? Does it sometimes give you trouble because you're like, oh shoot, I don't know what to do with it in this part. So just kind of talking about this obvious correlation between the character and this elemental energy that's around them.
Tom, talk about your fire girl.
Yeah, fire girl first.
Well, let's see. I guess from a nuts and bolts point, way to start talking about it, when I was designing the characters and I guess trying to focus on what I was going to write on, like a lot of the early symbolism was helpful to kind of at least mentally send me in certain directions. So when it came to Annie, and using the antimony symbol and fire for her, like I kind of took that from just the alchemical process, which is like a long running kind of theme and motif in the background of the story. Just the process of how an alchemist would work the ore of antimony or rather the ore of stibnite into antimony, and so like in a very literal way, I was able to like Annie's mom is called stibnite, which is the ore that antimony comes from, and antimony itself, antimony actually means never alone, and so by itself it's kind of useless, and it's usually better, and it's when it's being tempered by other like minerals and elements. Yeah, sure, and so like. And then the way it's used in antimony in the alchemical process as well, it's it goes through a series of changes and changes color, and fire is used to bring out certain qualities of it and that sort of stuff. And so like that just helped me, almost like a writing exercise, to help me send me in a particular direction, and then use that as flavoring the character, But then you asked about whether that can also be limiting, and I think that's kind of interesting too. That's a good point, because sometimes you might be a bit too much of a slave to motif, I guess, too much of a slave to like a particular aesthetic, and I think it's fine to kind of maybe step away and out of that, if as long as it's in aid of the story as a whole, not quite within the theme, but I do also think that it's interesting to put yourself in constraints and then work within those constraints rather than just kind of throw everything in there and then see what works,
I think slave to the aesthetic is also really interesting regarding Sleepless Domain, because like Mario was explaining earlier on, the idea behind choosing a water elemental is that people don't expect a lot out of the water elemental, and all the girls have a theme. So I think the limiting aspect is interesting to talk about, because it was literally like the theme of the original pitch in a lot of ways.
Yeah, like in Sleepless Domain, some of the characters are literally limited by their motif.
Yeah, but I do feel like the only real like restriction I felt is that it turns out it's when you have to render water all the time, it's a lot of trouble. So maybe give your character a different elemental power, maybe. But it is like a big thing to me that like in a lot of ways people see water both in universe and out as more limiting than it is, when it obviously it's like actually a very like strong and versatile power that she has, but just kind of internalize the idea that's like, oh well, I'm kind of like the one who doesn't assert herself, and I'm not strong like other people, so that's why I'm water. It's like whatever, but then you can do a lot with water. It's good.
Yeah. And I don't want to step on what you're saying, Mary.
Do it.
But when I was coming up with Monster Pulse, I was really, really interested in kind of older, using the human body as symbolism, and especially the problem is I was never a huge expert on it, so I can't go into super detail about it. But things like the humors and in college at the time, which I had just graduated from, I had studied a lot of medieval and earlier or slightly later interpretations of the human body before people really understood what was going on there. Like the idea of love coming from the heart is one we're familiar of, but they also thought that like anger came from the liver and things like that. And I was just really interested in kind of what seemed to me like a sort of primal and profound, if wrong and ignorant, like way of thinking about the human body as like this strange font of like power and emotion. So I thought it was a cool thing to base things on. And the heart is pretty obvious for the main character, I think, because it's very strong but also so vulnerable feeling. But the stomach also for Wes, because I haven't really talked about him, it's so bound up in like weird insecurities and social cues and stuff like that. I don't know. I just thought it seemed like a set of symbols that were really ripe for exploiting that I hadn't really seen used in this particular genre before. So I was really psyched to get into it. The problem was I didn't really know anything about the human body. So I still get people coming up to me like, oh, did you know that this organ is that? And did you do that on purpose? And I'm like, no, I didn't know that. I like the famous one is that
you're supposed to say yes, no. You're supposed to
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm the smartest.
Yeah. Like I actually found out late that the name Bina comes from a word that means heart, which I didn't know.
Oh, awesome.
So but it's cool how that worked out.
Score. Just
yeah. Anyway.
I think it's really interesting that like because we have like someone was pointing that out in the chat that we have like alchemical symbols in Sleepless. We have them a lot in Good Court too, but because you use the humors as an as a base for your motif, then that kind of puts you also in that whole medieval pseudoscience batch. Well, you guys all have the same like base inspiration.
I think that's a very attractive kind of aesthetic, isn't it?
Also, I guess if I'm being super honest, when I was coming up with Monster Pulse, it's not too much of a stretch to say it was very influenced by Gunnar Court. Then I wanted to do a long comic like that, so it's probably taking.
You're hearing from my lawyers.
as is warranted, yeah. And I think originally the main 4 characters were based on the 4 humors, but I don't think they are anymore. But at one point they were.
They started out that way.
Awesome.
So we had this other question. Someone was mentioning... I'm scrolling up in the chat to find it. Someone was talking about like characters' relationships with their parents and how that sort of affects their growth. I feel like in all 3 comics, those are actually incredibly different. So that might be like the hardest topic that we had to tackle today, and we only have a couple minutes left to do it. So I like a challenge. So in Sleepless, like, there's a lot of parent figures. I guess we could stick with the 2 main characters because we have Undyne that has like a very supportive, if a little absent, just because they're not being let in parent because they're sort of cut off from Undine emotionally right now. And then you have HP's parents that went the Disney way, tragically. And in Good Court, Annie is essentially the extension of her mother in a lot of like metaphysical ways, and the relationship with her dad is like very difficult, and sort of they both have super different expectations for what it should be. And in Monster Pulse, the relationship with the parents are also that kind of like, I'm trying to connect with you, but what the fuck are you doing? kind of mood. So, let's talk about the parents and, how the perception of them kind of influences the character's journey.
Magnolia, it's your turn to go first this time. Go!
Okay. I was very influenced for the whole story by a show called Digimon Tamers. And in that show, I was very impressed with how included the parents were, especially in, we always saw how they were reacting to what was happening with their kids, which I thought was kind of rare. And I really wanted to do a story like that where we see how the parents of these kids had something terrible happen to them. Well, and then they're reacting to it, and their parents don't really have a basis for how to react, so they're all discovering it as they go. And I'll try to keep it short. What I basically wanted to show is them all reacting differently, and because there's not really like how to raise kids book, like what happens when your kid's heart turns into a giant monster, and now they have to fight a bunch of other monsters, and so on and so forth. They struggle, they make mistakes, but I wanted to show that a parent making mistakes with their kids doesn't mean that they're a bad person, and that they're a human being who doesn't always know the right thing to do, which is the hard thing that we learn about our parents most of the time. And some of the parents in my comic are worse than others, but I've mostly tried to show that they are struggling as much as the kids are, and having a hard time as well, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
about you? Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mary.
Well, for SD, part of it's like me trying to find a balance between wanting the parents to act like real, reasonable people, but also in a way that allows the girls to do what they do in the comic. So, like, I've tried to start establishing a lot of like cultural things that a lot of expectations that like the parents aren't supposed to get in the way of their kids doing this job because normally they would want to if they're good parents. But like it's also because like a lot of times in magical girl stuff, either the parents are like absent or they're kind of like unreasonably like, oh, I support you fully, small child, going out, and I'm sure that's fine. And so I wanted to like get a little more into like how would you get to the point where you can convince yourself that this is fine while still being like someone who cares about your child.
I think that is interesting though, Mary, how you have it kind of baked into the world that they should be okay with it, and I think that's a smart way to write it.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
I'm kind of sad we didn't see more of the other alchemical team's parents after they died in a way, because it's kind of like, man, like if you're in a world where it's like, this is what happens and it's normal, but also your kid freaking died because of it, like how do you feel about that? You know?
Well, the comic's not over. Anything can happen.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I guess. Like, just sort of hinting at it that, you know, it'd be good if you did that. Note from the editor.
Yeah, it is one of those things where like you know, it's very easy for people who aren't those parents to say like, oh well, we understand the practical reality of the situation and why you need to be okay with it. But then obviously if it happens to you, you're gonna feel differently about the whole thing. So yeah, we might get into that a little.
What about you, Tom?
Well, I guess the parents in my story, I don't see them so much. I don't try not to make such a very clear divide between the kids and the adults. Like I just see them all as like their characters, and the parents are just older characters. You know, it's like I wanted it to seem. Well, I guess you know the longer spent on this earth, the more you realize that the adults actually don't know as much as they let on. You know, because as we become adults and we look back at kids and how they act, and we see in them what, you know, the ways that we used to act and still continue to act, you start to realize, oh, actually there is no like dividing line between a child and an adult, really. You know, it's a very gradual process of change, and so in a literary sense, you would have someone who's a child, and as they reach the end of their character development arc, they may well be just an adult now, but they're still the same character. So I kind of tried to keep that in mind with the parents in my story. So there was a scene where, say, very early on in the comic, where Kat kind of gets to take over her mom's old workshop where she would work on her projects and stuff when she was her age, and there was a small scene where Anya and Donnie, her husband, were watching the two girls walk off, and Anya would say, "Oh, I wish I could go with them," but they knew that like their time was in the past now, and it wouldn't really be appropriate to go and be messing around and hanging around with kids and you know, that kind of stuff. And I suppose
that's
with
Annie
Annie
pretty
as
good
well.
Self-awareness, honestly. More people should have that.
Sure, yeah, they really should. You know, like you should let people kind of revel in experiences themselves. Like, you know, you can try and impart kind of your wisdom and stuff, but you know, the notion that a young person won't listen to the advice of an older person, that's not a new thing. That's just the continual, you know, cycle of humanity, you know, and that will continue on into the future. You can never, you know, tell a young person how they should act. They will evidently figure it out themselves, and all you can hope to do, I suppose, is like help them like manage with the consequences, or try and impart some tidbits of wisdom without making it seem like you're trying to tell them what to do, that kind of thing. And when it comes to Annie and her mom, like the whole point at the beginning of the story was that a lot of the characters felt that Annie was basically just an offshoot of her mom, and in a very literal sense, she is the product of her mom, and that's why her mom isn't around anymore. But as we get to understand Annie some more, we actually realize that she's, personality-wise at least, very different from her mother, and possibly a lot closer to Tony, and her father, I mean. And so now she's starting to realize that some more, and the people around her are going to have to understand that too, and the readers too, as well, as much as they super hate Tony. They're also going to have to understand that no matter how awful they think Tony is, Annie still loves him, and like she understands, she's coming to understand why he is how he is, and because she's going to start seeing that a lot of the way that he acts is the way that she acts towards things. And so I try to keep everybody in the same world. I guess that's pretty obvious, but I try not to delineate very, very specifically between here's an adult, here's a child, and then they are at odds with each other forever because there's some big gulf between the two of them. That's just something I try to keep in mind.
So I'm gonna do one last question really quick because it kind of relates to this, but we're hitting that mark, so we're gonna do this one as quickly as possible. But since we're talking about parents, I think it's important to point out that in a lot of the stories, and this is a very common element in coming of age stories as a whole. Yeah, lightning round time. The chat's like, woo! Sort of this idea that you're going against or questioning authority or tradition. Like in a case of Sleepless Domain is extremely obvious because it's literally like you're in a world that's like, oh, magical girls fight monsters, and you got a couple characters going, I have some follow-up questions, and like nobody's really addressing that. In both Gunnicrid and Monster Pulse, there's like literally an entity that sort of represents like patriarchal tradition and authority in like the court, but also the forest, since you've got Coyote and all those characters. And in the case of Monster Pulse, you've got literally a government lab and people like trying to capture these kids. So you've got like the authority as an enemy is like a really, really good figure in Monster Pulse. So it's sort of just this idea of like, this is an extremely common theme in coming of age stories. Do you think that it's something that came naturally in your story? Was it something that you felt was unavoidable because of the theme? Or was it something that sort of just happened and you didn't really think about it at all?
For me, if you don't mind me jumping in, I sometimes actually wish that I had thought more carefully about that part of Monster Pulse, because when it comes right down to it, in this particular story, I didn't feel like I had much to say about the government or the concept of the government. I don't think it's really about that, but it ended up being that just because I guess it felt kind of X-Filesy, in a way of creating this force. But what I've tried to show later in the story, as I started to think about it more, is that it's less of it is sinister in some ways, especially certain figures in that organization, but it's also a lot of mistakes and things left unexamined that led things to be the way they were, and certain characters just kind of being allowed to do what they're doing because nobody looked in on it, kind of like that sort of thing. And I guess I wanted to turn it more into a kind of inept bureaucracy thing rather than the evil government's coming to get you kind of thing. So I guess for me the answer is I wish I had thought more carefully about it, and but I do see it as more fighting against an unknowable force rather than an authority necessarily, and trying to find a way to stay balanced against that. I don't know if that was coherent at all, but that was what I thought of when
Was.
you. Okay.
That makes sense. I mean, I definitely get that feeling. I didn't really mention my own comic a lot because I'm mostly here to host, but like in Namesake, it's also like a sort of like shadowy figure authority thing. And when I wrote it, I didn't do as well as a good job as I would have done now. And sometimes I'm just like, God damn it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wish I could go back and work on a little more, but c'est la vie.
Don't I know it? Yeah, for me, I really wanted to. I wanted the complication, with the relationship with the government to be complicated because, like, it is a very natural thing, especially for stories about the youth, to be like, like the authority figure. Obviously, they're trying to assert their dominance over you. You got to fight against them, and there is like an inherent tension there. But I wanted things to be more complicated than government bad, government has evil secrets. I wanted it to be like a slightly more nuanced relationship that they have to each other, where like everyone's trying to do the right thing, but whether that is or is not actually the right thing is up for possible debate.
I kind of tried to keep that in mind for mine too, where you have the two big forces, the court and the forest, and it is very natural, as you're saying, especially in a story about young people, to have something to rail against. Like it's the easiest way to set up conflict, for example, and it could be. I guess there's something very appealing to that to a younger audience, that there is, you got to constantly battle with the old fogies who don't let you do what you want, and that kind of stuff. But in my story, I tried to make it clear that neither the court or the forest are the good or the bad guys. They both do weird things that don't make any sense, and they can both be kind of benevolent in their own weird way too. And I tried to show that. There was one scene in particular where Kat realizes that like the one of her friends is working in a laboratory where she looks after the mice that are used for experiments and stuff, and that really upsets her. And Peth kind of explains that like it's not that the court is like some big a creature that is doing bad things. It's made up of lots of individual things, and like some of the things you might not like, but she herself, in working as part of that system, is doing like what she can to at least make the mice comfortable and help clean the cages and that kind of stuff. So while she is working as part of the court, she as an individual is doing something beneficial, which might not be kind of evident to somebody who's outside of that. And I guess that leads to other situations in the story where Annie or Kat might do something that they think is in the right, but actually might end up causing more harm than good. But that's only because they didn't really understand why something was the way it was, rather than kind of just assuming that it's bad. So they gotta like resolve that situation, And I think that's a bit more of a realistic kind of lesson to learn for the real life. Really, you can't just assume that. A bad guy is the kind of mustache twirling bad guy that once you've defeated, everything is going to be fine. You know what I mean?
I love how all of us answer that like, should you fight the man, or is the man complicated?
Yeah. Or should you just give in to the man?
Is always complicated.
Yeah.
Look, side eye the man.
Figure it out yourself.
Yeah, try to get him to
Throw
be
a
better.
dialogue.
Or
with
if
the
you
man.
can become the man, you can then drive everyone underneath your own heel.
Yeah,
Oh my.
sounds good.
No. Spoilers.
It's fun
Annie,
to
I can't
actually
believe it.
see like coming of age stories that are actually someone that goes like, but what if I became the man? And the other characters are like,
That is kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting kind of character journey to take too.
All right, so we're about done with this stream. So just gonna go with closing statements. So to remind everybody, this was the BEEHOME stream, the 5th stream in our lineup of 8 streams this weekend. So definitely check out our Twitter and tune in to see more. Our next stream is going to be at 5 o'clock. This was the challenges of writing a coming of age story with Mari Kagel, the author of many things, including Sleepless Domain. Magnolia Porter Siddell, who is the author of Monster Pulse, and surprise guest Tom Siddell, who is the author of Gonna Quit Court. This stream, yeah, it's 5 p.m. East. Someone just asked. It's Eastern time zone. So
It's only 4 p.m. East, isn't it?
No, like
Yeah,
the next stream is
Oh.
at 5, so in a little less than an hour.
yeah,
I see.
there's an hour break in between all streams because I need to hydrate and eat.
That makes sense.
Heck yeah.
Because I host all of these.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
So definitely check out everybody's comics, and if you missed part of the stream or you want to watch it again, all of these will be archived on our YouTube page. And as a reminder, we have a sale going out in our store. Use the code SPRING2020 and you can get a discount, namely on the first book of Sleepless Domain and the first and second book of Monster Pulse. So if like watching this stream made you want to read these books, you should totally go get those. We do not have the Gonna Quit Court books, but you can buy them through Amazon, and you should.
Probably still read it anyway. Yeah.
And you can read all of these online. And again, we have 2 Kickstarters running. Alice in the Nightmare, which is actually also a coming age story. So, if you like that type of story, you should definitely check out that Kickstarter. And we also have Among Us, which is a romance story. So that's it for this stream. Thank you so much to all our guests for joining. It was amazing. Very, very good insights. I think that anybody that's sort of tackling this genre will really enjoy watching this. And if you like this topic and you'd like us to go into more depth, Hiveworks is considering transforming these streams into sets of thematic streams that would be several streams on the same topic to really dive deep. So if this is one of the topics that you would like us to do a deep dive on, please let us know by tweeting at us, by leaving us messages on the YouTube channel, basically anything. And we really appreciate the feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yes, thank you.